Hi, welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing my July wrap up. I had a decent reading month in the month of July. I read 11 books, which is pretty good. I am still searching for the elusive 5-star new favorite book of the year, but I pretty much enjoyed everything that I read this month, so I'm excited to talk to you about all the books I read in July. I'm just going to jump right in because that seems the thing to do. The very first book that I finished in the month of July was Maame by Jessica George. This is an adult kind of like literary contemporary story about a woman named Maddie who is living in London with her father who has Parkinson's disease. She has basically been the sole caretaker of her father for the last few years because her mother lives in Ghana for the majority of the year running a hostel. At the beginning of the book, her mom tells her that she is going to come back to London, and so Maddie can go and sort of find her own life, get a life essentially. And so Maddie moves out, she finds some roommates, she meets some friends, she starts dating, and then tragedy strikes and she has to grapple with the guilt that she feels for not being present in her family's lives over the last few months and just trying to figure out how to move forward, how to continue to live the life that she wants to live. This was a really great coming of age story. I thought the writing was absolutely incredible. It is wild to me that this was Jessica George's debut novel because she feels like a very seasoned writer, someone who's been doing this for a long time. Maddie was an incredibly realistic and relatable main character. I think that every single person out there can relate to the struggles that she feels in her early to mid-20s, trying to figure out her place in the world, trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life, while also dealing with the obligations she feels to her family. I just really liked this. I found it to be an incredibly easy, readable, approachable sort of story, and it's something that I think anybody could read and get something from. I just really ended up enjoying this. I totally understand why it has been so hyped for the last year or so, and if it's something that you are wanting to read, if it's something that sounds interesting to you, I would definitely recommend giving it a go because I liked it more than even I anticipated I would. Next up, I read My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This is another sort of literary contemporary story. It's about a woman named Vanessa who had an inappropriate relationship with a teacher when she was in high school, and she has always looked back on this relationship as a very loving and caring relationship, and a relationship where she had equal footing as her male teacher. Many years later, 10 years after she's graduated from high school, another girl has come out and said that he abused her. And so it forces Vanessa to look back on this relationship and view it through a different lens. And it makes her question everything that she has thought and believed about her life and the way she understands love. This was a really hard book to read. I got physically ill reading this book in several moments. There is graphic on-page assault, so I would definitely recommend looking into some trigger warnings before you just jump into this because it's a dark read, it's hard to read, and it was definitely not just an easy breezy contemporary. I think that Kate Elizabeth Russell did a really good job of portraying this situation in a really respectful way while also delving into sort of the psyche that Vanessa is experiencing, because from the outside looking in, the reader knows that this was an unhealthy relationship. He groomed her and she formed this attachment to him that she could not let go of for years. But Vanessa's on the inside of it, and she, like I said, she feels like it is a very loving relationship. She feels like she has equal power in this relationship. And so when she starts to question all of that, it is devastating for her. And I really appreciated that while this book does end on more of a hopeful note, it doesn't wrap up everything perfectly. Vanessa is still a human being at the end of this book, and she is still trying to understand her life and herself and her experiences. And so it's not just wrapped up in a neat little bow. It is definitely a complicated situation and something that she fully recognizes she might not ever understand completely, but can only just continue to try to move forward. I really enjoyed this. I loved the writing. Kate Elizabeth Russell is a fantastic writer. And like I said, she portrayed the situation in such a respectful way. And I just appreciated everything about this book, even though it was a hard book to read from start to finish. I went through a little bit of a mystery phase in July, so the next book that I finished was One of the Girls by Lucy Clark. I do own this book, but I have lent it to my mom because I finished it and thought she would really enjoy it, so don't have it here physically, obviously. This follows 6 women as they travel to Greece for a bachelorette party, and at the beginning of the book, you find out that one of the girls on this trip, one of the women, becomes a killer by the end of the trip, and the rest of the book is sort of building up to what happens. You get to learn more about each of the characters and how their motivations for being on this trip differ from each other, and kind of the complicated history and relationships that they each have with each other. I thought this book was just okay. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. It was pretty average for me. I didn't really find anything shocking or thrilling about it. All the big reveals and moments were not surprising to me, but I thought it was a really fun sort of like poolside read. This is something I would recommend, like taking on vacation with you and reading at the beach or reading by the pool or whatever. It's an easy sort of fun thriller, but it's pretty basic. Like there's nothing like outstanding, like groundbreaking about this. I think that if you like something like Big Little Lies or The Family Game, then this is a book that you would definitely enjoy because it's pretty similar to those in terms of like writing style, like character structure, stuff like that. It didn't blow me away, but it also didn't bore me. So that's really all I can ask for. Next up, I'm going to talk about Volume 8 of Spy Family by Tatsuya Endo. This is sort of like a stand-in for all of the volumes of this manga series that I've read over the last few months that I haven't talked about. I think I talked about like Volume 1 and 2 maybe in a previous wrap-up, but then during my like YouTube hiatus, I read 3 through 7, and then in July I read Volume 8. This is just a fun, silly sort of manga series about this spy family. Essentially, like the main character is a spy for a country, and he is tasked with infiltrating this other country. He has to do all these various things to sort of like ingratiate himself into this society, and one of those things is getting a child through this prestigious private school. And so he adopts a little girl at the beginning of the first book, and then decides that she needs a mom, so he meets a woman and decides that he's going to marry her for the sake of this mission. And each of the members of this family obviously are hiding secrets. So Twilight is a spy. The little girl is a mind reader. She's like telepathic and she can read everyone's minds. And the woman, the mom, is a deadly assassin. So they're all navigating like their own secrets while also just living like this normal family life, and it is so silly and just like fun. I really enjoy this series a lot. Like I totally understand why it's so hyped and why so many people love it, because it is just like a really fun, silly little manga series. I believe Volume 9 is the last one that's been translated into English. That came out in March, and I do own it. I just haven't read it yet. So I will be doing that soon, but then I'll be caught up until more volumes come out. Yeah, this is like the longest manga series that I've kept up with. Like I've gotten into and I've kept on reading with it. So obviously I enjoy it. It's fun, it's silly, and I totally would recommend it if you're looking for something that isn't going to take like a ton of brain power to read, but will definitely entertain you. Next up, I read The Other Side of Night by Adam Hamdy, which is a mystery thriller sort of story about these 3 different people and how their lives all intertwine. We follow an author, we follow a disgraced police officer, and then a man who both of them know, who sort of like ties the mystery together. If you go on Goodreads and you look at reviews of this book, all of the reviews will tell you to go into this knowing absolutely nothing about it. Go into it blind and just experience the story for what it is. If you don't mind going into books, believing that they're one thing, and then finding out that they're something else, I would recommend that as well. But if you go into this thinking you're gonna get a straightforward mystery thriller, I would recommend doing a little bit of research, because there is a way to research this book without spoiling like everything, just so you know that you're getting into something that's a little bit different than just your everyday mystery thriller. I personally didn't like this as much as I think I could have if I had been prepared for some of the reveals that happened, because I just wasn't expecting it, and it's not what I wanted from this story. So I was a little bit disappointed. I do ultimately think that like it was a great mystery, like it was plotted really well, and I definitely enjoyed the twists and I appreciated the twists after I got past the initial shock of them. But yeah, it just wasn't like the perfect mystery for me, just because I was expecting one thing and I thought it was going to go in one direction and it went somewhere completely different. And that's just not what I wanted from, well, anything really. So yeah, I didn't love it as much as I feel like I could have if I had known what was coming. But maybe you are different, and maybe you would have seen it coming and it wouldn't have been such a shock to you. It just was a shock to me, and I didn't like fully appreciate it because it's just not what I wanted. I wouldn't recommend the audiobook for this one. I didn't really care for the narrator, but I thought the book was fine, and I would recommend it if you want something that's a little bit different than your average everyday mystery thriller. Just, be prepared for it to not be your average everyday mystery thriller. I was sort of doing this video in July where I was giving some authors that I had previously not enjoyed a second chance, and I ended up DNFing like 4 books in a row for that video, so I scrapped it because it just was not working out for me. But the one win that I did have from the list of books that I was picking from for that video was In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is a memoir, and it's all about the author's time in an abusive relationship when she was like in her early 20s, and she was in like an MFA program, and she sort of tells the story of this relationship through this horror lens a little bit. Like, she frames this relationship as a house, and there's all of these moments that kind of borrow from other genres of literature. It's all framed in this house that she calls the Dream House. I thought this was really incredible. I loved the writing style. I felt the story was so personal to the author, and she put so much of herself into it. And you can definitely tell as you're reading it that while she has moved on from this relationship, she's not fully like healed from the relationship. And writing the book is bringing back memories of those moments when she just felt absolute despair and didn't know how to get out of the situation, but can also look back on those moments and be thankful that she did get out of them. I didn't give this book a rating on Goodreads because it just felt like such a personal story that I just didn't feel like it was my place to judge the book. But if I were going to like judge it solely off of the writing and the way it made me feel, it would absolutely be a 5-star read, just because it was just incredible. The end of the book, she talks about her relationship with the woman that she ended up marrying, and how they both sort of survived this same woman, the same abusive relationship. They both survived that and came together in their grief and overcoming and healing. Then I found out, like, not that long ago, they filed for divorce, which I just found to be so sad. I mean, I understand that's the real world, and sometimes relationships don't work out, but the book is such a love letter to her wife, sort of like the end of the book especially is such a love letter to her wife, how they kind of saved each other from their trauma. And then to find out that like a year ago they filed for divorce, just, it broke my heart a little bit. That knowledge didn't take away from the reading experience for me, because I would definitely recommend this book if you like memoirs and you want something that is told through a little bit of a different lens, a different frame than your just average memoir. Again, I would definitely recommend looking up trigger warnings, because this is not an easy book to read, and it does not shy away from hard topics. She gets pretty graphic in some places about the abuse that she endured, so just be cautious. But if it's something that you think you would enjoy, then I would recommend giving it a go. And I would also really recommend the audiobook, because Carmen Maria Machado narrates it herself, and she just brings her story to life, obviously. After that, I went through a bit of a romance, specifically fantasy romance period, and I read 2 pretty hyped fantasy romances. The first of those being Fourth Wing, of course. I bought into the hype. I went into it with kind of an objective viewpoint, because I knew in my bones that it was not going to be great. Like, it wasn't going to be the most amazing thing that I'd ever read. I have a hard time trusting TikTok when they say that things are the best book that's ever been written, because 9 times out of 10, those books are really poorly written and not enjoyable for me at all. I will say that Fourth Wing is not well written and definitely lacks in a lot of areas, but I did find it to be so readable and fun. I hate to use the word fun, but I did find it to be pretty fun, and I did end up enjoying the reading experience for the most part. If you don't know, Fourth Wing is about a girl named Violet who is being forced into the military college by her mother, who is like the general of the military college. She is being forced to go and train as a dragon rider, because everybody in that family has, for generations, has gone back being dragon riders. And obviously she gets there, she does make it through the first trial, and she meets her childhood best friend, who she's always sort of had a little thing for, and then also like the resident bad boy. There's dragons, there's drama. There's all kinds of stuff going on in this book. And yeah, I mean, it's like so poorly written. The world building is non-existent. The plot veers off into like a completely romantic zone for the like second half of the book. It's not a great book. It's not like the most amazing piece of literature that's ever existed. It's not something that is going to be on the shelves of classics for many, many years to come. But it was a fun time. Like, I had a good time reading it. I was never bored for a single second of this book, and I finished it, and it leaves off on a bit of a cliffhanger that I didn't really see coming, honestly. So I'm for sure going to be picking up the second book when it comes out in November. I'm just here for a good time. I'm along for the ride. I don't really care what happens going forward. I'm just going to keep reading them and keep having an entertaining time. And I can look back and say, yeah, objectively, that book is not good. It's very poorly written, and the author clearly has never written a fantasy book before and doesn't really know how to develop a fantasy world. But I had a good time with it, and I felt good while I was reading it, so I'm going to keep reading it. And that's that. I mean, that's really all I have to say about Fourth Wing. It is exactly what you expect it to be, and that's okay. After that, I sort of wanted to stay in that fantasy romance space. I wanted something that, again, I didn't have to like really think about. I could just turn my brain off and get sucked into something. And so I read the second book in the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas, the House of Sky and Breath, which was not good. Also not good, like less good than Fourth Wing in a lot of aspects. Although I will say that Sarah J. Maas is probably a better writer than Rebecca Yarros. Her books are so boring. Like, this was so boring. This was 800 pages, and I feel like 700 of them could have been cut out completely, and the book would have stayed the same in terms of like the plot. So if you don't know, the Crescent City series is essentially this like urban fantasy mystery series following our main character Bryce, who in the first book, her best friend has died, and she gets paired up with an angel named Hunt, who is like a police officer in this town, to investigate these mysterious deaths that are connected to her best friend's death. Things happen, you learn things about the world, so much happens, and obviously Bryce and Hunt like get the hots for each other. At the end of the first book, they've sort of solved that mystery, and now they're like hopefully going to live happily ever after. But then obviously a new mystery crops up in book 2, and so they get back on this investigating train, and more stuff happens. They learn more about the world that they live in and meet more characters and creatures and things. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in this series that doesn't need to be happening. Like, it's just so overwritten, and there's too many characters. Sarah J. Maas has like basically the same formula for every single one of her books, for every single one of her characters. They're going to go through the same trials and tribulations, and at the end of it, they're going to live happily ever after, and things are going to very, very conveniently work out in their favor, and none of our favorites are going to die, because that's just not how Sarah J. Maas writes books. Yeah, I mean, I went into this wanting to learn more about this world, and I already knew the like cliffhanger spoiler ending because I saw it on TikTok, so I was just like waiting to see how we were going to get there. I just found this to be really boring. Like, it took me way longer to read than it probably should have, because I didn't feel excited to like keep picking it back up. I listened to the audiobook, and I don't like the audiobook narrator's narration, especially during like sex scenes and stuff. I just feel like she's so apathetic for like the kind of story this is. It was fine, and I'm gonna read book 3 because I definitely want to find out what's gonna happen next, which sucks that Sarah J. Maas can just like write this 800-page pile of crap that is just not good, and then also still suck me back in the last like 30 pages to want to pick up another probably 800-page book by her. Like, it's just frustrating that that's the happening. And I guess I have free will and I can choose not to pick up book 3, but then I won't know what happens, and I want to know what happens. Sarah J. Maas is one of those authors that people who love her or want to read her are already reading her. So the fact that it took me so long to pick this up, I'm not really sure. I don't really love her. She's sort of like a guilty pleasure author for me because her books are so the same. Like, every single series is the same. But I keep coming back, and I keep picking them up, and I probably will continue to keep coming back and keep picking them up. So the only person I can be mad at is myself for buying into her forever. Next up, I read another TikTok romance that wasn't good. And that was Flawless by Elsie Silver. This is the first book in the Chestnut Springs companion series about these brothers who live on a ranch with their dad. And the first book is about Rhett, who is a famous bull rider. At the beginning of the book, he gets into some trouble with one of his sponsors, and so his manager sends the female main character, whose name is Summer, to babysit him, essentially, and like repair his image. And obviously they travel all over, going to all these like bull riding competitions, and fall in love. It was fine. Like, I guess I understand why people like the series, but I personally didn't have like the best time reading this, just because it was sort of boring. Like, not a lot happens. It's really repetitive, especially when they're like traveling to all these bull riding competitions. And it took a really long time for them to like admit that they had feelings for each other, and to finally like the romance for it to start. It was just like this average romance, and I felt okay about it. I don't know if I'm going to continue on, because I have heard the second book is way better than the first one. It follows the oldest brother of this family, and he is like a single dad, and he gets into a relationship with the woman he's hired to be his kid's nanny, I think. I might read that one, because I do love like single dad romances, but I don't know if I really want to. I just don't know that Elsie Silver's writing is for me. I don't know. I just didn't really feel connected to the story or her characters, so I don't know that I want to like read anymore. Also, I read the synopses for all the books in the series, and I just really don't like books where like a big part of the romance is a huge age gap, and they talk about the age gap in all the books. It seems like that's like her thing, like all her books, even like older series, it seems like her thing is writing romances where like the male main character is quite a bit older than the female main character, or the female main character is quite a bit older than the male main character. I don't have a problem with age gap romances in real life or in literature. I just don't like books where that is such a big deal to the characters that there's such a huge age difference. And I'm pretty sure the second book, there's like a 13-year age difference, which is like in the synopsis. So if it's in the synopsis, it's probably going to be talked about so much in the book that it's going to annoy me. So I just don't know if I want to keep going with it. I mean, it's so hyped, and I probably will buy into the hype at some point and at least read book 2, but it's not the top of my priority list. Next up, I read Infamous by Lex Croucher, which is the like follow-up novel to her historical romance debut that came out a couple years ago called Reputation. This is not a direct sequel or anything. It's just also a historical romance. This follows two friends, Eddie and Rose. They pretty much done everything together their whole lives, and when they were younger, they made a pact that they would never get married, and they would just like hang out, live with each other forever. And then once they get into like their late teens, early 20s, Rose starts going to more parties and trying to meet a husband, and Eddie feels betrayed because Rose is going against the deal they made. Eddie dreams of being a writer. She wants to publish novels, and she meets this like sort of like illustrious novelist named Nash Nicholson, and she gets like kind of like caught up in his orbit, and he invites her to come stay at his house for a few months and write her novel, and he'll like help her like critique it and then send it to his editor to hopefully get published. I really like Lex Croucher's writing style. I think that she does a really, really great job of capturing this like historical romance feel while also feeling a little bit more inclusive and diverse than, you know, obviously the time period warranted. My problem with this book is that I wasn't quite prepared for the manic pixie dream girl boy trope thing. It's my least favorite trope ever, and I actively avoid books with that trope in them because I hate that. I hate it so much. And I wasn't prepared for that to be the case in this book. I thought it was going to be more along the lines of she sort of had this like romance with Nash Nicholson, when in fact he was just like a fuckboy who was the worst, and she got like so obsessed with him to the point where she was not listening to reason from anyone, especially her best friend who's known her whole life. So I found it to be very frustrating. I found Eddie to be a frustrating character to read from. She's supposed to be this like really smart girl who can deduce things, and she's a writer, and everybody knows that she's smart and has all these opportunities in life, and yet she can't see what's going on. And so yeah, I just found it to be frustrating, but I did like it. I mean, I liked the reading experience, and I liked like the ending, and it's queer, so I liked that. I would recommend it if it's a little bit different than your average historical romance. Just know that you will get very frustrated by Eddie and Rose at points, and Nash, and you might not always have the best time reading this, but it's fine. And And finally, we are ending it off on a novella that I read right at the end of July, and that was To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. This is a sci-fi novella that follows 4 astronauts who have been tasked with going and visiting these planets that are habitable. It's told in the form of like a letter or like a video log about their experience going to these different places and grappling with the idea that they shouldn't necessarily be astronauts. Like they shouldn't, like, who are they to be exploring all these places and disturbing these ecosystems just for like the sake of humanity. I just thought it was really interesting. It wasn't very long. Obviously it's a novella. I kind of wish that it had been a little bit longer and there were parts of it that had been expounded on a little bit more. But I also don't know that I would want to read like a full-length novel of this. I think it served its purpose in a short amount of time, and I think that if you add too much more, then it won't have quite the same feeling. I just personally don't like short fiction. I'm not a big short stories girl. I don't really like novellas. I want to be the kind of person who can appreciate short fiction. It's just not really my jam. It definitely was more enjoyable to me than the other book by Becky Chambers that I've read, which was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and it made me want to read more of her works in the future. But this just, I'm just not a short fiction girl. I would recommend it if you like sort of like sci-fi, space opera sort of stories. If you like short fiction, for sure, read this because you'll probably love it. It just was only okay to me. So those are the 11 books that I read in the month of July. I'll be honest, I was getting to like the latter half of this video and I was thinking like I should just scrap this because I'm not having a good time talking about these books that I didn't, absolutely love. I'm struggling so much right now with my reading. I haven't had a 5-star read since January. My only 5-star read of the year so far has been the 8th book in the Wayward Children series, Lost in the Moment and Found. Is that the most recent one that came out? That's the last book I gave 5 stars to, which is so disappointing. I want to read a 5-star book. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this video and how you felt about them. Do you have similar or different opinions to me? I'd really love to know. Also, let me know some books that you read in the month of July or like your favorite book that you read in July. Did you have a 5-star read in July? If so, please recommend it to me. I'm dying. I'm going to say it right now. I'm going to put this out there in the universe and I'm going to try to manifest it. My favorite book of the year, I'm going to read in August. We'll see if that happens. If you got all the way to the end of this video, then I appreciate you so much because I'm sure it wasn't like the most enjoyable video to watch. I'm sure it was just not like that fun to sit through and experience. But if you made it all the way to the end, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for watching. And I will see you again in another video very soon. Bye.